The studio lights burn bright, their glow reflecting off polished microphones and nervous faces. Cameras pan slowly across a semicircle of chairs, the kind of setup reserved for high-profile panels, where every word is measured and every silence magnified. Morgan Freeman leans forward, voice smooth but laced with something unexpected, condescension. "You see," he begins, his tone calm yet cutting, "some people mistake loudness for leadership. Passion doesn't always equal intellect." The crowd chuckles. The sound is soft at first, but it spreads like wildfire, polite laughter giving way to knowing smirks. Across from him, Representative Jasmine Crockett sits motionless. No defensive shift, no visible flinch, just quiet stillness. The camera finds her eyes, steady, unreadable, alive with restraint. Freeman continues, the legend commanding the room effortlessly, unaware of the line he's walking. "It's admirable, of course, the energy," he adds with a faint grin. "But sometimes, the smartest move is knowing when to stop talking." A murmur ripples through the audience. The camera lingers on Jasmine. Her lips barely part, a faint smile flickering. Not amusement, but understanding. She knows exactly what just happened. The room thinks it's his moment. He thinks it's his victory lap, but silence becomes her weapon. Seconds pass, heavy and electric. The laughter fades, one breath at a time, replaced by a hum of anticipation. Everyone waits for her reaction, her rebuttal, her rage. But none comes. Instead, Jasmine straightens slightly, eyes locked on Freeman. When she finally speaks, her voice is measured, soft enough to draw listeners in, sharp enough to cut through the tension. "Mr. Freeman," she says, "you've played wise men all your life. I understand why you'd expect everyone else to speak like your scripts." The air shifts. The laughter dies. Her tone remains calm, but her gaze is unflinching. A look that reminds everyone she's not acting. She's living it. Freeman blinks, briefly caught off guard. No one moves. The silence feels endless. And then, she leans forward just slightly, the faintest smile returning, because the moment she spoke, the laughter stopped. Even Morgan Freeman didn't see it coming. Morgan Freeman isn't just another panel guest. He's an institution, a voice of gravitas, a living emblem of wisdom. Generations have grown up hearing his narration frame history, redemption, and humanity itself. When he speaks, people listen. When he critiques, they nod. His words carry the weight of experience, and his calm delivery often feels like gospel. That's what makes his jab at Jasmine Crockett so potent. It isn't just a personal slight. It's cultural authority challenging emerging truth. To the audience watching, this isn't merely about a disagreement. It's symbolic. A towering Hollywood icon, refined, measured, venerated, sits across from a young congresswoman who's made her mark by being unapologetically vocal. One represents establishment prestige, the other, the voice of a new America, diverse, direct, unfiltered. Jasmine Crockett's name didn't rise quietly. From fiery floor speeches to viral clips of her defending justice and equity, she's become a lightning rod. Admirers see brilliance, passion, and courage. Critics call her loud, combative, too bold for politics. Every time she speaks, she walks the line between validation and vilification. That's the tightrope so many women, especially women of color, are forced to navigate. So when Freeman's words carry that subtle undertone, knowing when to stop talking, the moment transforms. It becomes larger than the room, larger than him or her. It's about who gets to define intelligence, who's deemed composed, and who's labeled emotional. For Jasmine, it's not about ego. It's about representation. Millions watching see themselves in her silence. The students, the professionals, the dreamers, all who've been told to wait their turn, to temper their tone, to make their message palatable. Her stillness isn't hesitation. It's calculation. She's weighing not just her words, but the legacy of them. Morgan Freeman represents the world that believes wisdom should sound familiar, deep, steady, masculine, and aged in experience. Jasmine embodies the one that insists wisdom also comes from those rising, from those fighting, from those never handed the microphone but seizing it anyway. The tension between them hums like static, a generational, cultural, and ideological standoff. Each word she chooses could echo far beyond that set. For the producers behind the glass, the silence feels dangerous. Ratings gold, yes, but unpredictable. For the audience, it's magnetic. You can almost feel the collective breath being held across living rooms and phones everywhere. This isn't just a talk show. It's a moment of reckoning disguised as entertainment. Jasmine's composure isn't resistance, it's clarity. She understands that responding to arrogance with anger only feeds the narrative, but meeting it with intellect and grace dismantles it from the inside. Every fiber of her being has been shaped for moments like this. The courtroom, the Congress floor, now the camera's unblinking eye. Freeman thinks he's teaching a lesson. What he doesn't realize is that he's become the subject of one, because when a legend tries to define your worth, you either shrink or you redefine the legend himself. Morgan Freeman has built an empire of reverence, a career carved from calm certainty and cinematic truth. His voice has narrated everything from the story of God to the story of America. When he speaks, his cadence carries weight, slow, deliberate, every pause drenched in quiet authority. But somewhere in that stillness lies a shadow. For years, audiences have celebrated Freeman's charm, that gentle humor, that easy smile. Yet in countless interviews, tucked behind the smooth delivery, there's a pattern, the subtle brush of condescension. A certain tone reserved for the young, the unseasoned, or the unapologetically outspoken. The kind of tone that doesn't shout over you. It dismisses you softly. Like a parent humoring a child, clips circulate online, snippets of Freeman leaning back in interviews, eyes half closed, grinning as a younger guest tries to challenge him. He interrupts not with hostility but with a chuckle. He waves off counterpoints with phrases like, "You'll understand when you've lived a little," or "Wisdom takes time." The audience laughs every time, as if the laugh track itself has been trained to obey him. And yet, somewhere deep in those moments, a discomfort lingers. That laughter, it doesn't always sound like amusement. Sometimes it sounds like compliance, like people laughing because silence would be too revealing. In one montage, you'd see it clearly. Freeman on a podcast, gently correcting a journalist mid-sentence, the crowd tittering politely. Freeman at a film panel calling a young activist too passionate for her own good. Freeman on a red carpet Q&A where he dismisses a female host's serious question with a grin. Now, don't overthink it, sweetheart. The audience laughs again. Always the same rhythm, humor, dominance, applause. Social media tells another story. Clips dissected, captions added, voices rising in debate. Some defend him fiercely. He's old school, he's earned it. Others call it what it is. Toned-down arrogance dressed in charm. Hashtags emerge. Respect or dismissal. The Freeman effect. The myth of the untouchable elder statesman begins to crack under scrutiny. Inside the studio, the audience's reaction mirrors that divide. Some lean forward, grinning in admiration, ready to side with the legend. Others fidget, sensing something off, that faint air of superiority disguised as teaching. The laughter feels strained now, the comfort slipping away. This isn't the Freeman of cinema, the redemptive figure, the moral compass. This is the Freeman of power, the man whose intellect has become armor. The one who's learned that control isn't about volume, it's about tone. He doesn't need to raise his voice to win a room. He just lowers it until you're forced to lean in. That's what makes his exchange with Jasmine so electrifying. Because for the first time, the formula fails. The charm doesn't land. The authority doesn't dominate. The wisdom sounds rehearsed. Across from him sits a woman who's seen enough of that tone to recognize it instantly. Not as mentorship, but as a mask. Freeman's shadow looms large, not evil, but emblematic. He's the embodiment of an establishment that hides exclusion behind eloquence. His words are never crude, but their precision cuts just as deeply. Knowing when to stop talking, he told her earlier, the words dressed as advice, but sharp enough to wound. That's the quiet genius of intellectual dominance. It convinces the world it's kindness. It cloaks dismissal in elegance. It wins applause for undermining you gracefully. And for decades, no one dared challenge it, until now. Because what Jasmine represents is more than just youth or boldness. She represents the awakening. The generation that no longer bows to polite suppression. The kind that hears the undertone and says, "No, I caught that." And in that studio, surrounded by laughter and lights, the shadow of Morgan Freeman's confidence begins to tremble. His calm, once disarming, now feels defensive. His humor, once charming, now sounds strategic. The audience starts to sense it too. The moment where admiration becomes awareness. For a man who spent a lifetime being the voice of truth, the hardest sound to face is silence that doesn't agree. He thought this would be another easy exchange, until Jasmine flipped the script. Long before the cameras, before the trending hashtags and televised debates, Jasmine Crockett's voice was tempered in the heat of real struggle, not the cinematic kind, but the kind that tests who you are when nobody's watching. Her story doesn't begin in the marble halls of Congress. It starts in a small Texas courtroom, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the air heavy with fatigue and quiet defiance. She wasn't a celebrity then, just a public defender with a stack of case files taller than her paycheck, standing up for people the system had already forgotten. Those courtrooms were her battlegrounds, her classrooms, her proving ground. She'd walk in, often facing judges who'd glance over her credentials and underestimate her before she even spoke. Opposing attorneys twice her age, twice her connections, smiled politely, until she dismantled their arguments piece by piece. The first time she heard someone mutter, "too emotional for law," she didn't argue. She just won the case. There were nights she'd stay in her office long after the cleaners had gone home, case files scattered, a single lamp glowing over her notes. She wasn't chasing applause. She was chasing fairness. The kind that doesn't come easy, especially for a black woman in the justice system. The kind that demands more than brilliance. It demands persistence, composure, and the courage to walk into rooms that were never designed to welcome you. Her rise wasn't meteoric. It was earned inch by inch, through long hearings, hostile cross-examinations, and the quiet victories no one bothered to record. Local activists began to notice. So did the people whose lives she changed. Single mothers, wrongfully accused teens, veterans lost in bureaucracy. They started showing up to her rallies when she ran for office. Not because she promised miracles, but because she listened. Then came the media, the scrutiny, the labels, fiery, aggressive, unpolished. The words that have long been code for too unapologetic. They tried to box her in, reduce her power to tone, her conviction to temperament. But Jasmine had already learned, if you let the world define your story, it will write you out of it. So she redefined it. She turned every attack into an argument for authenticity, every mischaracterization into a moment of clarity. When reporters asked if she worried about being too bold for Congress, she smiled and said, "Justice doesn't come to those who whisper." Her journey to Capitol Hill was anything but smooth. She faced opponents who doubted her intellect, donors who second-guessed her viability, commentators who couldn't decide whether to dismiss her or fear her. But she kept showing up. Every community event, every policy meeting, every town hall, she showed up with presence, with poise, and with that same calm fire that once won her courtroom battles. Her strength wasn't in volume, it was in velocity. She spoke truths that traveled farther than outrage, words that cut through noise because they were rooted in clarity, not chaos. In Congress, her voice grew sharper, more deliberate. She became a defender not just of policy, but of principle. When others dodged controversy, she confronted it head-on. She talked about racial inequities, voter suppression, gender bias, topics that made people uncomfortable. But necessary discomfort has always been her native language. Behind the scenes, though, her power came from empathy. Staffers remember how she'd stop midday to check in on interns. Constituents recall her late-night calls after town meetings, making sure a single mother had access to housing assistance or a veteran got the medical records he needed. She believed politics wasn't performance, it was service. And service wasn't a slogan, it was sacrifice. Her internal philosophy was simple but unshakable. Don't fight to be heard. Speak so truth echoes by itself. It's why she never shouts in interviews. Why she doesn't match aggression with aggression. She knows calmness unnerves arrogance. That silence, when purposeful, has the weight of thunder. Her composure became her armor, her clarity, her weapon. While others strategized around poles and optics, Jasmine moved with moral gravity. You could sense it in her presence, not the charisma of celebrity, but the conviction of someone who's had to prove herself every single day. By the time she stepped into that studio with Morgan Freeman, she wasn't walking into an ambush. She was walking into a moment she'd been preparing for her whole life. The difference between the courtroom and the camera wasn't intimidation. It was illumination. This time the audience wasn't 12 jurors. It was millions watching to see if calm truth could still triumph in an era addicted to spectacle. And she knew exactly what was at stake, because this wasn't about her pride. It was about representation. For every woman told to lower her tone, for every voice that had been laughed off the stage of public discourse. She wasn't just defending herself. She was defending the idea that intellect and integrity don't need to shout to be powerful. So when Freeman mocked her on air, when the laughter rippled and the room leaned in to see if she'd crumble, she didn't flinch, she smiled. Morgan Freeman leans forward, voice rich and deliberate, the kind of tone that has narrated documentaries, defined dignity, and commanded rooms for decades. He isn't raising his voice. He doesn't have to. His calm is weaponized charm, his criticism disguised as concern. I just think, he begins, eyes glinting beneath studio lights, that sometimes people mistake passion for wisdom. You can shout about justice all day long, but shouting doesn't build understanding. The audience chuckles softly, unsure whether to applaud or stay cautious. It sounds reasonable. How could it not when spoken in that legendary voice? The kind of voice that has comforted millions, now subtly questioning the intelligence of the woman sitting opposite him. Jasmine doesn't blink. She tilts her head slightly, as if examining not the insult, but the intention behind it. Freeman continues, sensing approval in the air. I respect what you're trying to do, he adds, his smile patient, condescending in its politeness. But the real problem is everyone wants to play hero these days. Politics, activism, Hollywood. Everyone thinks their opinion is gospel. Laughter again. But it's nervous now, because even as he speaks, Jasmine's silence stretches longer than comfort allows. The camera pans, her eyes steady, her breathing even. She waits until the laughter fades, until every murmur in the studio dissolves into quiet curiosity. Then she leans forward just slightly, voice calm but electric. Morgan, she says softly, can I ask you something? He smiles, amused. Of course. Her tone remains steady, neither defensive nor deferential. You've spent your life telling stories about justice, about truth, about humanity. But when was the last time you listened to someone who didn't already have a stage? The question lands like a tremor. He hesitates, searching for the rhythm that once made every word he spoke sound like scripture. But the room has changed. The laughter has evaporated. The smiles have frozen. Jasmine continues, her words deliberate, each one measured like a scalpel. Because it's easy to talk about humanity when the world already calls you wise. It's harder when you have to prove your humanity just to be heard. The panel shifts uncomfortably. One of the hosts glances toward the control booth. Even the crew seems to realize the tone of the conversation has changed. Freeman tries to recover, his chuckle thin. Now I'm just saying, but Jasmine doesn't let him. Not by interruption, but by presence. Her gaze holds him in place, and she speaks again, softer this time. I understand what you're saying about passion, but passion built this country. It's what made people march, organize, vote, speak, even when they were told to be quiet. Passion, she pauses, eyes narrowing just slightly, isn't noise. It's courage. He exhales through his nose, leaning back, crossing his arms, a sign of retreat more than composure. The audience senses it, the shift, the reversal. For the first time, Morgan Freeman looks like a man reaching for control he doesn't have. She presses gently, never raising her voice. You said everyone wants to play hero, she says. But some of us don't have that luxury. Some of us are just trying to make sure the truth doesn't get buried under the comfort of old voices. The silence that follows is absolute. It's the kind of silence that television producers fear. The kind that can't be cut with background music or a quick edit, because it's real, because it's heavy, because it means something has landed. Freeman clears his throat, trying to recompose his authority. Well, that's an interesting point, he says, the usual resonance of his voice thinner now, the edge of uncertainty creeping in. But Jasmine doesn't respond. She doesn't need to. The power has already shifted. The host tries to interject, sensing the awkwardness. Let's move to our next topic. But no one moves. Not yet. Every eye is still on Jasmine, whose calm composure radiates more power than any monologue could. She doesn't gloat, doesn't smirk. She simply folds her hands, the faintest hint of empathy softening her expression. Not victory, but truth acknowledged. And in that moment, it's clear. The debate isn't about who spoke louder. It's about who spoke with more conviction. Then, with one perfectly measured line, she left him speechless. The pause lingers, a living thing between them. Morgan Freeman's eyes, once so assured, now narrow slightly as if searching for footing on ground that no longer feels solid. The cameras catch it, the audience feels it. The moment breathes with quiet electricity. Jasmine Crockett doesn't rush. She's deliberate, her voice calm yet cutting with precision. "You know," she begins, "it's interesting how quickly passion gets called anger when it comes from people like me." The words float through the room, poised, controlled, but undeniably heavy. Freeman leans back slightly, his hands clasped, eyes flickering with surprise. "I've heard that my tone is too sharp," Jasmine continues, "that I should be more measured, more graceful. But I wonder, who decided what grace looks like? Who benefits when my tone makes people comfortable instead of my truth making them think?" No raised voice, no sarcasm, just logic and lived reality delivered like a scalpel to ego. Freeman shifts in his seat, lips parting as if to respond, but something in her delivery holds him still. The audience senses it too. This isn't confrontation, it's correction. A masterclass in restraint, she presses on. "You said earlier that shouting doesn't build understanding. But Mr. Freeman, understanding doesn't build itself. It takes people willing to be loud enough to make you look, even when you'd rather not." Her gaze doesn't waver. It's not rebellion in her eyes. It's grace sharpened by exhaustion. "The truth is," she continues, "I've spent years listening to men with microphones explain how the world works. But when black women, speak from experience, it's called emotion instead of insight. We don't get to be the narrators of our own stories. We get narrated." Gasps ripple from the live audience. One host swallows audibly. The control room camera quietly zooms closer on Freeman's face, his jaw tight, eyes cast downward for a split second. Jasmine doesn't look at him. She speaks to the air, to everyone watching. "And maybe it's not personal, Mr. Freeman. Maybe it's systemic. Maybe what you call wisdom has been built on the idea that experience only counts when it comes from a man who already has the world's respect." Freeman exhales, slow, contemplative, the sound of a man realizing the argument isn't about him, but everything he represents. The audience stays silent. Even the hum of the light seems quieter now. Then Jasmine leans in slightly, the tone softening, humanizing. "I grew up hearing your voice tell stories about freedom, struggle, hope. I admired that. You taught generations to see light in the darkness. But what I've learned, standing where I stand now, is that light doesn't just come from narrators. It comes from those willing to speak, even when their voice trembles. Her words disarm, not attack. There's no venom, only clarity. It's the kind of truth that doesn't need volume, only presence." Freeman's gaze lifts. For the first time, there's no pretense of dominance. His expression softens, a quiet humility in the corners of his eyes. Jasmine continues, her rhythm steady. "You asked me earlier what shouting accomplishes. It accomplishes survival. Because silence, for people like me, has never been safety. It's been erasure. And every time I speak, I'm reminding someone watching that their truth deserves to be heard too." Applause begins, hesitant at first, then growing. But she doesn't pause for it. Her focus stays on him. "And I don't need everyone to agree with me," she says. "But I do need people to understand that comfort has never been the measure of progress. Discomfort is."
"It's what pushes nations forward, what reshapes old ideas, what forces us to evolve." She glances briefly toward the crowd.
"So if my voice shakes a few tables, maybe those tables needed shaking." The line lands like thunder wrapped in silk. Freeman's eyes close for half a beat. He nods, once slow, deliberate. "That's fair," he murmurs, but his voice cracks slightly. The steady confidence replaced with reflection. The moderator tries to steer the show back on track, but no one moves. No one wants to cut away from what's unfolding. Jasmine offers a faint smile, not smug, but peaceful. "I don't say this to challenge you," she adds, her voice quieter now. "I say it because I respect what you've built. But respect shouldn't mean silence. It should mean honesty, even when honesty stings. That's when it happens. The shift." Freeman's eyes glisten slightly under the lights. The man who's narrated centuries of struggle on screen now sits in quiet contemplation, face softening as if hearing something new. Something that reaches him, not as an actor, but as a human being. He nods again, slower this time. "You're right," he admits, voice subdued. "Maybe I've gotten too used to hearing my own voice." The audience exhales collectively, the tension breaking into quiet awe. Some clap softly, others just watch, stunned by the intimacy of the exchange. Jasmine smiles gently, meeting his gaze. "We all have," she says. "That's why we need more voices, not fewer." It's the perfect closure. Calm, complete, transcendent. But even as the moment ends, the atmosphere lingers. The cameras capture Freeman lowering his head slightly, a quiet gesture of acknowledgement. The kind that doesn't need words. Social media will later dissect every second. The tilt of his head, the calm in her tone. The moment a cultural icon became the student. Clips will loop endlessly across timelines. The moment Jasmine Crockett silenced Morgan Freeman, without raising her voice. Comment sections will explode. She didn't just win the debate. She changed the conversation. This is how you teach without tearing down. Dignity has never looked this powerful. The viral flood begins even before the show ends. On X, on TikTok, on every platform, her quote circulates like gospel. Passion isn't noise. It's courage. And beneath that, millions of views, millions of echoes. Freeman, later in a backstage interview, will simply say, "That woman reminded me what grace sounds like." Because that's what Jasmine Crockett had done. Taken mockery and turned it into a masterclass, a dissection of ego that never spilled into insult. She had built her victory not by tearing down a man's legacy, but by elevating the truth he'd forgotten to see. In that moment, the audience didn't just witness a debate, they witnessed transformation. A moment of pure, poised defiance that silenced arrogance with empathy. And when the lights dimmed, it was clear dignity had won the night. But the aftermath of that moment would turn a televised exchange into a cultural reckoning. It started within minutes of the broadcast ending. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's poised takedown flooded every corner of the internet. On X, the hashtag Dr. Crockett silences Freeman shot to #1 worldwide, followed by Respect Over Fame and Dr. Truth Wins. Every platform pulsed with the same electric current, disbelief, admiration, and a collective sense that something bigger than television had just happened. The first wave came from social media commentators, short, viral posts with millions of views. She didn't just respond, one tweet read. She rewrote the dynamic. Another post simply said, "Grace is the new power," accompanied by a still image of Jasmine, mid-sentence, calm and radiant. The frame would become an instant meme, replicated, remixed, and reshared with captions like, "This is what composure looks like," and "Silence them with truth." Within hours, major outlets joined in. CNN's late-night recap called it, "The moment calm intellect dismantled cultural authority." MSNBC labeled it, "A generational exchange that defined a new era of discourse." Even conservative talk shows, unable to ignore the clip's momentum, framed it as a wake-up call about humility in the public eye. Then came the late-night hosts, each spinning the exchange into something cultural, not just political. On one show, a split-screen replay contrasted Freeman's mockery with Jasmine's stillness. The audience roared at the contrast, not because it was funny, but because it was true. It wasn't comedy anymore. It was commentary. Political podcasts dove deeper. Analysts, sociologists, and digital creators dissected every word, tone, and gesture. One viral thread compared the moment to historical turning points in media power, when the public stopped worshiping icons and started questioning them. "This isn't about disrespect," one podcaster said. "It's about evolution. It's about a generation that values authenticity over legacy, truth over tone." The sentiment spread, especially among young activists, women, and marginalized communities. They saw Jasmine not just as a politician, but as proof that intellect and dignity could shatter even the oldest hierarchies. The comment sections became digital town squares filled with pride and unity. "She didn't yell," one viewer wrote. "She didn't perform. She just existed in her truth. And it was enough." Across timelines, people began reflecting on their own experiences, being underestimated, talked over, dismissed. Jasmine's calm dismantling of Freeman's authority became a mirror for millions who'd felt silenced in classrooms, workplaces, and debates. TikTok edits surfaced with cinematic soundtracks. Her quote, "Passion isn't noise. It's courage," layered over slow-motion replays, fading into applause and text overlays like history shifts. Quietly, news anchors called it a lesson in the art of response. Influencers called it the modern definition of leadership. But not everyone was celebrating. In certain corners of the establishment, the moment stirred discomfort. Editorials surfaced questioning whether she had been too assertive or too philosophical for a political figure. Yet even those critiques fell flat. Every attempt to reframe her grace as aggression only amplified her authenticity. And Freeman's response? Silence at first. Then, days later, a statement through his publicist, humble, reflective. Congresswoman Crockett spoke truth with honor, it read. We should all learn from that. It was short but sincere. And just like that, the story shifted again, from conflict to reflection, from ego to understanding. By the week's end, the moment had transcended debate shows and entered classrooms, sermons, and leadership seminars. Professors referenced it in communication courses. Motivational speakers replayed her clip at conferences. Even school teachers used it to teach the power of composure under pressure. It was no longer just a viral clip. It had become cultural currency. Memes turned into messages. Posts turned into movements. And through it all, Jasmine stayed silent. No follow-up interviews. No self-congratulations. Just a simple message posted to her social account. Respect isn't demanded. It's demonstrated. That single line gathered millions of likes, cementing her position not just as a political figure, but as a symbol of grace under fire. Commentators began comparing it to generational shifts, the passing of symbolic power. Freeman represented the old world of authority rooted in celebrity and reverence. Jasmine represented the new, leadership rooted in conviction, intellect, and presence. The exchange was no longer about one interview. It had become a metaphor for the cultural crossroads of 2025. People weren't just watching a debate. They were witnessing transformation. A new era of discourse, where moral clarity outshone pedigree, and poise became the sharpest weapon of all. And as clips continued circulating, one comment kept resurfacing, written and rewritten thousands of times. She didn't destroy him. She awakened him. The irony was poetic. The actor who once narrated freedom had just been reminded of it. Live on air by a woman who embodied it. By week's end, hashtags had become headlines, and headlines had become history. The clip didn't fade. It evolved, replayed endlessly as both cautionary tale and source of empowerment. And through the noise, one truth began to echo louder than all the rest, a truth too profound to be unseen. But beyond the headlines, a deeper truth began echoing, one that couldn't be unseen. When the noise finally settled, the hashtags dimmed. The comment sections cooled and the replay counters stopped ticking. What lingered wasn't the clash. It was the quiet. In that stillness, the world seemed to finally grasp what had happened. Freeman's silence after Jasmine's words wasn't defeat. It was realization. It was the sound of intellect meeting integrity, of performance meeting principle, and recognizing which one endures. That silence became symbolic. It spread beyond the broadcast, beyond the debate. It stood as a mirror to a culture obsessed with volume, proving that not all strength shouts. Some simply stand still. Jasmine Crockett's composure became a lesson in modern leadership. She didn't interrupt, retaliate, or grandstand. She listened. She waited. Then she spoke with precision, every syllable anchored in empathy, not ego. In an age of outrage, her calm felt radical. Commentators began calling it the Crockett Doctrine, the art of answering arrogance with authenticity. But Jasmine didn't craft doctrine. She embodied it. Her grace wasn't a performance, it was a practice. And that authenticity exposed a truth America desperately needed to remember. Dignity still moves people. Because the moment wasn't really about a debate or a generational divide. It was about the moral architecture of discourse itself, what it means to lead, to listen, to speak truth without tearing down. It reminded millions that real leadership doesn't demand the spotlight. It earns it through composure. Freeman's reaction, the faint smile, the lowered eyes, The quiet acknowledgement became an unexpected symbol, too. The man who'd built a career on wisdom found himself confronted by it. His silence wasn't weakness. It was respect. It was what happens when confidence yields to clarity. And perhaps that was the hidden beauty of the exchange, that both figures, in their own way, revealed something human. Jasmine showed that courage can exist without aggression. Freeman showed that humility can follow pride. Together they created a rare, fleeting moment of equilibrium, where truth didn't have to shout to be heard. Across America, reflections poured in. Educators spoke of it as a teachable moment. Activists called it a case study in poise. Even corporate leaders cited it in discussions about emotional intelligence. What started as a televised exchange had become a meditation on civility itself. Because beneath the headlines and hashtags, a deeper question had emerged. When did discourse become theater? When did we start mistaking cleverness for wisdom or noise for conviction? Jasmine's calm answer reminded everyone that progress isn't built on who talks louder. It's built on who listens deeper. Her composure stood as quiet defiance against a culture that rewards reaction over reflection. She didn't outtalk her opponent. She outlasted the performance. She replaced spectacle with sincerity, and the audience, weary of sound bites, finally exhaled. By the week's end, think pieces called her moment a reset. Editorials declared it a turning point for American dialogue. It wasn't about left or right, celebrity or politician. It was about tone, empathy, and truth reclaiming space in the conversation. And somewhere within that transformation, Freeman's silence became a metaphor for something far greater, the point where ego yields to understanding. It became a cinematic still frame for our time, a man known for his voice, quiet in reflection, and a woman known for her resilience. Calm in conviction, because that's where real strength lives, not in dominance, but in restraint. Not in volume, but in vision. As the final replay faded from screens, one truth resonated in the hearts of millions who had watched, shared, and reflected. Integrity outlasts charisma. Principles outshine performance. And truth, when spoken with calm certainty, has no equal. Because sometimes, silence isn't weakness. It's the sound of truth being heard. The replay begins one last time. That defining instant when Jasmine Crockett delivers the line that silences the room. The camera captures it in slow motion, her steady gaze, her calm tone, her truth landing heavier than any insult could. And there it is, Morgan Freeman, speechless. A legend without words. That single moment became more than a viral clip. It became a statement. Proof that calm intellect can disarm arrogance, that clarity can conquer condescension. In a world where shouting is mistaken for strength, Jasmine reminded everyone that real power doesn't roar. It resonates. Her poise wasn't just performance. It was principle, the kind forged through experience, empathy, and conviction. She showed that confidence isn't about overpowering someone. It's about outlasting the noise. As the screen fades to black, her words echo like a quiet anthem for a louder world. Truth doesn't tremble, and maybe that's the challenge left for all of us. To meet arrogance with grace, chaos with composure, hate with higher ground. Because if one calm voice can silence a room, imagine what a generation of them could do. Share this if you believe real power is calm, reasoned, and rooted in truth. Let the world remember that silence, not as the absence of speech, but as the victory of integrity. Fade out. The sound of applause replaced by reflection. Pride lingers, not for who spoke louder, but for who spoke last and right.